Okay, we are live. It's been a minute since we have been live, and this channel has had a growth spurt during that time. It's been a minute, but we are here. Right, where do we start? First of all, welcome to the Chinksey Sports Presents, the Premier League show, episode 13. Big games up this week. There's been an international break between the last episode and this one, but without any further ado, we're going to start at Molineux. Game between Wolverhampton Wanderers and Tottenham Hotspur ended 2-1 to the home side. A game that Wolves pretty much dominated for the whole game, but similar to their games against Manchester United and Liverpool in the first half, they were profligate in front of goal. It looked as though it was going to be the case once again in this one. Spurs took an early lead through Brennan Johnson, but offered very little throughout the match. They hung on up until the closing minutes of the match when Spanish winger Pablo Sarabia came off the bench and got himself on the score sheet with a brilliant goal of the month contender of an equaliser, before setting up Gabonese midfielder Mario Lemina to seal a much deserved victory. Yeah, it looked like Spurs was going to pinch that game. I felt Wolves dominated from start to finish and they got their much deserved win. The next game was at the Emirates Stadium between Arsenal and struggling Burnley, ended 3-1 to Arsenal. Very much a case of attack v defence. Arsenal struggled to break down a much improved and resilient Burnley for almost all of the first half, up until Belgian forward Leandro Trossard, deputising for Jesus and Nketiah, bundled in from close range just before half time. Burnley were defending for their lives with a low block, but it was only a matter of time before Arsenal would pick the locks. Early into the second half, against the run of play, Burnley managed to equalise through Josh Brownhill to send the Emirates crowd into shock. Shortly after, William Saliba restored Arsenal's lead from a header from a set piece, or from a corner in fact. You feel that with his height and presence, Saliba should be getting more goals, especially from set pieces, perhaps 4 or 5 a season. Zinchenko, who was drafted back into the side after a recent dip in form, scored with a delightful scissor kick, another goal of the month contender, to kill off the game as a contest. Substitute Fabio Vieira then saw red after a poor challenge in what proved to be a comfortable win for the Gunners. At Old Trafford, the game between Manchester United and Luton Town ended 1-0 to United. Another game which was attack against defence for 90 minutes. Luton defended resolutely, but you just felt once United got their noses ahead, the game would be over. And that proved to be the case. Luton offered next to nothing going forward, but remarkably United, the Premier League's most informed team, are now just 7 points off of leaders Manchester City, despite already losing to them. The next game was at Selhurst Park between informed Everton and Crystal Palace. It ended 3-2 to Everton. A topsy-turvy game of football which saw Sean Dyche's men continue their rich vein of form. Palace managed to peg back the Toffees twice before a late strike from Senegalese midfielder Idrissa Gueye sealed the points for the away side, who since this game have been docked 10 points and currently lie in 19th position. I still fancy them to survive though, because I feel that they'll still accumulate more points than the 3 promoted sides, Sheffield United, Burnley and Luton, as well as Bournemouth. Speaking of Bournemouth, the next game was the 5:30 kickoff at the Vitality Stadium between Bournemouth and Newcastle. Ended 2-0 to Bournemouth. The Cherries made Newcastle look like the Newcastle of old. Mike Ashley and Steve Bruce's era Newcastle. The Newcastle before Eddie Howe in both performance and personnel. Their fullback Kieran Trippier had a verbal exchange with some fans after the game where, to paraphrase, he said, "They had a lot of injuries and the lads are giving everything." In other words, what do you expect us to do with these group of players? They're giving their all, they're giving their best, and they can't really give much more. But yeah, since beating Manchester United and Arsenal in the same week, they've had two really disappointing defeats to Borussia Dortmund and Bournemouth now, in results that threaten to derail their season. Bournemouth ran out well-deserved winners are now on an upturn in form with 2 wins from their last 3 games, going into their relegation 6-pointer against Sheffield United later on today. The next game was at the Amex Stadium between Brighton Hove Albion and Sheffield United. It ended 1 apiece. I'm sure that Sheffield United will view a draw against a much-changed Brighton as a point gained, despite having a man advantage for almost half an hour. They now have 4 points from 6 after beating Wolves the previous week, going into back-to-back fixtures with Bournemouth and Burnley, where I'm sure they'll be targeting 4 points minimum. Obviously, Sunday's game was between Liverpool and Brentford. It ended 3-0 to Liverpool. Liverpool just blew Brentford away here. I mean, don't get me wrong, I did expect a home win, despite Liverpool not winning for 2 games, which were both away. But I thought Brentford would put up more resistance, even at Anfield, which in my view is the toughest place now and always has been to go and win. Mo Salah for me continues to show why he's arguably been the player of the season so far, and he's arguably the best player in the league, just period. The next one is quite an exciting game, another topsy-turvy game at the London Stadium between West Ham United and Nottingham Forest. It ended 3-2 to the home side, West Ham. I feel like West Ham would have been really relieved to have won this one. They're plugging away in Europe. They're doing really well. Top of a really tricky group, which includes Freiburg of Germany and Olympiacos of Greece. They're also in the Carabao Cup quarterfinals and currently sit 9th in the league. I'm not sure if much more would have been expected of David Moyes this season. And I also feel that their new additions have settled in quite well. And obviously, their starting lineup of Areola, Kufal, Agward, Zuma, Emerson, Alvarez, Ward-Prowse, Paqueta, Bowen, Kudos, Benrahma or Antonio seems to be their go-to team. Although it feels like Mikel Antonio, who's in the last year of his contract, seems to be being phased out of the team, and Moyes looks like he's favouring a false number 9 like a Bowen or Kudos. But no, they did well to get that win in that game, and yeah, they're just inside the top half of the table. Right, next game was between Aston Villa and Fulham. It ended 3-1 to Villa. Aston Villa at home is almost a weekly banker on the accumulator. You just knew that they were going to win this one. Tougher tests await them though, at Villa Park, as in the next 2 home games they face league champions Manchester City, followed by the last side to beat them at Villa Park in Arteta's Arsenal. At the start of the season, I said I felt that Villa wouldn't make the top 6 or even the top 7, but it's looking like I might have been wrong on that one. Also, I feel like they are strong favourites for the Europa Conference League, a competition I feel like they should win, especially with the squad they have. And you would think that they could definitely get into that top 6, might even get into the top 4. But one thing is for sure, they'll be challenging the likes of Manchester United, Newcastle and Spurs for the top 5, behind Arsenal, Liverpool and Man City this season. Fulham, on the other hand, look really poor, and if Bournemouth keep winning and Burnley can pick up some form, they might start looking over their shoulders. Right, the last game, last but not least, was the game of the week, game of the season so far, was between Chelsea and Manchester City. It ended 4-4, 4 apiece. Quite frankly, the game of the season. Cole Palmer showed a great temperament and great poise from the penalty spot to level deep into added time against his former club Manchester City, of whom he spent 15 years with. He seemed like a confident lad who just doesn't seem to be fazed by anything. Has already made his England debut and has already got 2 caps to his name. But Man City, on the other hand, squandered the lead, I think, about 3 or 4 times in this game. And no, 3 times. They were 1 down. But yeah, they didn't really play their best. You feel like if they did, they would have won the game. But it'll be interesting to see how they can hit back now as they go into another tough game against Liverpool in a couple hours' time. Right, that was the summary of the last game week's results, which feels like ages ago. But yeah, here's my predictions for this week for the upcoming fixtures, starting once again with Manchester City, who take on Liverpool in a few hours, like I mentioned. I've gone 2-1 to City. Could easily be 3-2 either way, but I've gone with a 2-1 home win. Manchester City have an exceptional home record. I think it's 23 straight wins in all competitions or something like that. I'm really intrigued to know how Liverpool will set up their midfield, because I feel if they go gung-ho like they have been for 90% of the season, with McAllister playing as a deep-lying playmaker, with no one, i.e. Endo, in particular, protecting that back four. If Endo doesn't play, quite frankly, because Klopp don't rate him, reminiscent of when they bought Ozan Kabak and Ben Davies a few years back. And Unsung City could pick them apart at ease, either way though. However, on the other hand, I feel that Pep needs to get his midfield free, right? Something along the lines of Rodri, Bernardo, or either Kovacic to contain Liverpool, or Phil Foden to really go at them. One thing's for sure though is that Bernardo will play. It's just a question of where. Liverpool boss Jurgen Klopp was fuming because his side always seemed to get early kickoff straight after the international breaks. I can understand his frustrations though, considering he has quite a large South American contingent of key players such as Darwin Núñez, Luis Diaz, Alexis McAllister, Alisson, and then Mo Salah travelling to Africa. So yeah, once again, I think City just going to edge this one out. I'm going 2-1. Burnley against West Ham. I've gone 2-0 to West Ham, the Claret and Blue Derby. I think the international break could give Vincent Kompany a chance to kind of recharge his batteries and start afresh, if you like. West Ham love playing on the counter-attack, and they've already had successes against Brighton, Arsenal and Chelsea this season. Burnley like to play a possession-based football, and they like to play out from the back. And I'm sure that David Moyes will set up his team to exploit the Clarets on the counter, even though they are also the Clarets. I don't see Burnley scoring in this one though. I've gone 2-0 to West Ham. Sheffield United against Bournemouth. I've gone 1-1 stalemate. Sheffield United are on somewhat of a mini resurgence with 4 points from 6. I would be confident in getting something from this game too. Similarly, Bournemouth have picked up 2 wins from 3, and they'll be looking to make that 3 from 4 at Bramhall Lane. I think if you ask both managers privately who'd be happier with the point, I reckon Paul Heckingbottom would. 1-1. Next game is at what's Luton Stadium called? Kenilworth Road, between Crystal Palace and Luton. I've gone 2-1 to Palace. I feel like these are the types of fixtures that Luton would have earmarked as must-wins. They need to, well, at least minimum take a point from. The immediate sides above them, the Fulhams, the Wolves, the Bournemouths, and certainly the Crystal Palaces. On the contrary, I think if Palace want to finally break into the top 10, it's a place where they've got to pick up 3 points. They were a little bit unlucky in their last game. However, they do have their 2 best players back in Michael Olise and Eberici Eze. So I think Roy Hodgson will now release the shackles a little bit and let them express themselves, which is bad news for Luton. I feel like they'll have too much for them, so I've gone 2-1 to Palace, even though I fancy Luton to get themselves a goal. The next fixture is between Nottingham Forest and Brighton. I've gone 2-1 to the wayside Brighton. I didn't realise that Brighton hadn't won in the league since September, because their result against Ajax and a few draws skewed my thinking to making it look like they've been unbeaten in a while. Also, the fact that they've had a tough run of fixtures, they've had Europe, they've drawn a lot of games, and the international breaks to punctuate the season means that their form is open to interpretation based on what you'd expect from Brighton. You could either look at it as they've only lost 1 in 8 in all competitions, and that was to Manchester City, or you could spin it the other way and say they won 3 in 11 in all competitions. And when you factor in those wins came against Bournemouth and Ajax twice, struggling Ajax, and they failed to beat the likes of Fulham and Sheffield United at home, then you'd probably see it as a worrying trajectory that the Seagulls need to put right. With a win at the City Ground, a place where Forest haven't lost in the league since last April. I fancy Brighton to get back to winning ways though, with a hard-fought 2-1 away win. Next fixture is between Newcastle United and Chelsea. I've gone 2-1 to Newcastle. I was thinking, could it be 2-0? But I've gone 2-1. I feel like this game should be really interesting because Chelsea fans and the club as a whole went into the international break buzzing after their 4-4 draw with City, followed up a 4-1 away win to Spurs. That's 8 goals in 2 games. On the contrary, Newcastle succumbed to a shambolic 2-0 defeat to Bournemouth just days after a loss to Bournemouth left their future Champions League participation hanging by a thread. It's likely that they'll need a heroic performance and a win in Paris, who won 5-2 yesterday and looked pretty good against Monaco, to have any chance of progressing now. My prediction is presuming that Newcastle can get some of their key players such as Sven Botman, Bruno, Guy Marias, and Isaac, who I'm hearing are all back. If so, I think that the fans will be back on side to spur them on after that Bournemouth debacle. Also, Chelsea don't tend to travel too well, so I've gone for a 2-1 win for the Magpies. 5:30 kickoff today at the GTEC Stadium between Brentford and Arsenal, London derby. I think this is one of those games that everyone thinks is going to be a tough one, but could easily end up a 3 or 4-0 to Arsenal. And those games usually involve Brentford. I think the last one was against Liverpool, where people were thinking, Brentford might get something from it, and they ended up losing 3-0. I feel like this is another one of those. I don't think it'll be 4, mind you, but I think Arsenal will win the match 2-0. So I think it's going to be 2-0. I think what it's going to be is the result will look comfortable, but the match will be tough, which is how a lot of matches involving Brentford are. I fancy Arsenal with the Saliba, Gabriel axis at the back and Jorginho and Rice in midfield. I feel like they're going to have too much for the Bees. Right, the next one is tomorrow's fixture between Tottenham Hotspurs and Aston Villa. I've gone 3-1 to Villa. This could easily be the game of the weekend. As the saying goes, styles make fights. I've been waiting to see Villa come up against one of the top sides. I know they've played Liverpool, Brighton and Newcastle, but they were earlier on in the season and not many teams in the league, if any, will come away from Anfield unscathed. These two sides are 4th and 5th respectively in the table. Spurs have lost their last 2, a handful of first team. They've lost their last 2 games, a handful of first team players, and have dropped from 1st to 4th in recent weeks. Whereas Villa have been scoring goals for fun, are the 2nd top scorers in the league with 29 goals. Only City have scored more and are scintillating on the counter-attack. Just ask Newcastle, Brighton and Chelsea fans. I can't help but feel that Spurs' almost gung-ho style is tailor-made for Unai Emery's men, and that the better a Spurs side to come up against Villa, be it form and players like Maddison and Van der Ven, it more or less plays into Villa's hands for them to soak up the pressure and hit them on the break with the mercurial front 2 of Moussa Diaby and Ollie Watkins. So, my prediction is 3-1 to Villa. Another fixture tomorrow is at Goodison Park between Everton and Manchester United. I've gone 3-2 to United, who are the away side, with the news of Everton's 10-point deduction sending shockwaves through the league and consequently condemning the Toffees to 19th place. I feel that the league's informed team will be ruining having to go to inform Everton. I think Sean Dyche will use this to galvanise the squad and set them a very achievable challenge of survival, despite the impediment placed amongst the club. I've just listened to his press conference and he sounds quite bullish. As bullish as ever, in fact. However, Bulls can't play football. They've got to keep their heads and just play like they've been playing for the past month or so. The fans will help them, but once again, the fans can't play the match. And as well as Everton are playing, I've went against Manchester United in recent weeks, despite knowing and saying many times that they are the masters of grinding out undeserved results. But I'm backing them for a win here, 3-2 to United. Last game of the weekend is on Monday. Not the most glamorous match, but it's between Fulham and Wolverhampton Wanderers. I've gone 2-0 to Wolves. Wolves have been, for me, fantastic this season, with the exception of the Brighton match where I think they lost 4-1 at home. And a number of VAR decisions going against them, costing them valuable points. I looked at the table and they could easily have been 5 or 6 more points more than what they have. And that would have propelled them into the European positions. Fulham, on the other hand, have been disappointing. And if they're not careful, could see themselves sleepwalking their way into a relegation scrap. I think that their manager, Marco Silva, is a couple of bad results away from being under pressure for the sack. But I've got to go for an away win. Like and subscribe and ball. We'll be back next week. Bow.